Where would we be without the various products delivered by the men and women in the trucking industry? Healthy Conversations in Trucking podcast is a platform for professional long-haul truck drivers to share their journeys over the road, educating listeners about the trucking industry and lifestyle. Now, let's dive into the conversation on this brand new episode.
Greetings, everyone, and thank you for joining me on this episode of Healthy Conversations in Trucking. Now, in a moment, I'll connect my interview with our guest on this episode, and you're in for a treat. We're joined by Ross McFadden, who is a long-haul driver for many, many years, several decades. He's got a lot of experience, and he hauls livestock. He talks about his entire journey with us from starting out as, he said, sort of an accidental stumble into trucking as he started out hauling chickens to just help pay for college. And he talks to us about how this continued on. And I won't share any, I won't give away anything. So let me not talk about it anymore. The reason I have this little introduction is you may be able to hear a little something different in my voice. There's a bit of congestion there. I've actually been battling COVID for the last week or so. I'm much, much better. I did have I'm using air quotes, they say mild symptoms, but that's relatively speaking, depending on who you're asking about the mild symptoms. But at any rate, it's been a bit of a battle. I'm back, back to work, doing a lot of things that I normally would do. I just sound a little under the weather here. Also, the other part of why I'm introducing this episode, this little, intro track here, is because toward the end of our conversation, I have this new gear that I'm using to record my episodes with, and it blinked out on me at the very end. So I will come back, and it's just the last few bits of some things that he shared with me that I really want to make sure you get. So after our conversation at the very end, make sure you hang on, because I'll come back and I will share with you the bits of the conversation that got deleted from our initial recording. So at any rate, it's a very different conversation today. Just hang in there with us. It's a great one. I think you'll really enjoy this. And like I said, I'll be back at the end to make sure that I can wrap up those good bits of advice he was sharing toward the end. All right, let me connect my conversation with Ross right now. I am really excited to introduce all of you to my guest on this episode, Ross McFadden. Ross, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Well, I'm just fine today, thank you.
Well, I'm excited to have you here. We've been chatting a little bit before I hit record, so I'm really excited for our conversation. Why don't you start out by telling us a little bit about yourself? Tell me, how long have you been in trucking?
I was almost started trucking by mistake. I sometimes wonder about it, if it's not still a mistake. But back in I think would have been the fall of 73. I was going to university, and at Christmas time, I ran out of funds. So I was off a farm, and it's typical even today. I believe that the farm boys always get some of the best chances at hard work jobs. And I went and applied for a job at a dairy for driving truck. I just wanted to make enough money so I could go back to school. And I got hired, and next thing I know, I'm in a semi, and I'm on the road delivering milk in a local area. And I did that all that summer and went back to school, and eventually I graduated, and I drifted back into trucking because at that point in time, this would be the late 70s by this time, there wasn't a lot of open job opportunities, it seemed, in the professional fields. I had engineering as a background, but there wasn't much available at that time. So I wound up going back into trucking, and I met a couple of young fellows. They hauled chickens, I needed help, and shoot, I'll do that for a while. And the next thing I know, I bought a truck of my own, and I've been at it ever since.
Wow.
And just, it's changed.
Yeah.
Over the years, but that's how I got started.
How was it? What was it like hauling chickens? Did you have to get them into cages to get them onto the truck, or how did that work?
Well, that job itself has changed a lot since I left it, but it's basically we hauled the trailers, and the trailers took them to the farms, of course, and the trailers were just big sets of drawers on the side of the trailer, and they had a crew there that would catch the chickens, 12 at a time, and we'd put 24 chickens in each drawer, and then that would be it. We would load, I think it was 7,200 chickens on a load.
Wow.
And we would just simply go from there to the plant where they were processed. And the drawback to that job was it's virtually all night work. It's not conducive to any kind of family life.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the biggest drawbacks to it. It was just you were gone every night. So I went into hauling cows. So I was home. I was gone all the time. After that, I convinced myself that would be a better thing to do.
So now I'm really curious. When you haul cows, how many do you do that now still?
I haul pigs right now.
So do they move around a lot when you're driving, and how does that affect the trailer when you're, moving, when they're moving?
I guess I've been doing this now. I've been hauling cows since 1990, and there's a lot of things that I just don't even think about how it's done anymore. They will move around, and you can get yourself into trouble pretty readily. Just by the way, there is space for them to move to a certain extent. They're not just a free run on the whole trailer. You have gates to keep them in somewhat of containment, so that they are a little easier to work with.
Mm-hmm.
We can put it that way.
Is it the same with pigs?
Oh, well, pigs are a lot like hauling freight. That once you put them on, as a rule, that you use gates to control them as well. But once they're on the trailer, they don't move around very much.
Mm.
It's a very controlled business for animal welfare,
mm-hmm.
And rightfully so. We have every business is confronted by people who will cut corners, and so they've brought in rules that are very, very restrictive about how we haul them, the number of hours we can have them on the trailer,
mm-hmm.
How they're loaded, how they're unloaded, and it's all very sensitive. You have to respect the fact that a lot of the pork product is internationally destined, and so that they've got to meet all the standards any country may have, and so much of it goes to Japan, Southeast Asia, and they have rules that we have to make sure we comply with here in Canada and the U.S. so we're not going to get anything kicked back because of feed additives or animal treatment anywhere along the chain. So that part there, that's another paper in your pocket you got to carry around, more or less.
So when it goes to other countries, are the animals live when you're seeing live animals to other countries?
Well, for instance, the pigs that I haul come out of central Alberta, and they go to South Dakota and Minnesota.
Okay.
And they're raised down there and processed down there, and then they can go anywhere in the world after that. Canada depends heavily on export pork products, and so does the U.S. I can't tell you the numbers, but I've looked at the numbers, and it's a huge amount of poundage that goes to other countries. So we have to operate within those rules, and it's just like, it's not just hours of service and vehicle maintenance. It's the rules within the livestock industry.
Yeah. Have you always hauled livestock, from chickens, pigs, cows?
Yep.
So it's like that's your niche.
I did a couple of years where I did swinging beef, and like, that's beef that was already, it was hung on the roof of the trailer, and I took it from here in central Alberta to Quebec, and that could be challenging because it was just, they don't do it anymore. I don't know of any place anymore that hangs the beef from the roof of the trailer anymore. It all goes in combo bins. And that was a load that swung. And when you got that load swinging, you could tip it.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah. And there was lots of guys that had that experience, unfortunately.
Before we had cameras recording every mistake that everybody made on the road.
Yes. Well, yes, but at the same time, if you made a mistake with that, they had lots of people out there to look at your mistake after.
Yeah.
I started, it's kind of funny. I started with, I bought, from the young fellows that I was dealing with, that I got into hauling chickens with, I bought a truck, a cab over Ford. The model would have been a WT 9000 for anybody that remembers them. They were like a butter box up on them over the engine. They were as square as truck as it was ever made, I think. And they were Ford maybe made some very good trucks, and I know they did, but this wasn't the top of the line effort. It was cold in the wintertime, hot in the summertime. You could never get enough heat in it. We had auxiliary heaters in it, and you could never get your air conditioning to work enough to keep you cool in the summertime. But it was at a time when everybody had cab overs. Like, there were a cab over engine model was a very common truck, and in fact, probably the majority of them were. But it was a good little truck, and I made it. It was a pretty good truck to begin with too. And I went from there up to a CLT 9000, which is another Ford. It was the vernacular was they called it a two-story Edsel. It had an air ride cab on it, and it was the exact opposite as far as driver comfort goes. It was beautiful. It was quiet inside, comfortable in the winter, comfortable in the summertime. And it's one of those trucks that, when I think about the trucks that I've owned, I wouldn't mind having that one back, but it was a long time ago. 1980, 81.
Hmm.
And I've had a few since then. I put a few kilometers and miles on since then.
Are you an owner-operator?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, I'm an incorporated company. I have my own operating authority, and I do most of that myself. Just
Okay.
in fact, today is the day to file my IFTA taxes.
Ah. Well, I'm glad this interview can be a reminder for you.
Well, I have to the end of the month, and I'm usually pretty good at pushing right to the end of the month. But it's a good day to do it. You do. I don't know. I suppose most people are familiar in some ways with IFTA, but it's the International Fuel Tax Agreement. And it's just a question of recording all your mileage and fuel consumption in each jurisdiction. And actually, when you file it with the government, they got it very simplified. You just put your distances in for each jurisdiction and your fuel consumed, and it figures it all out for you anymore.
Nice.
And so, yeah, as long as you got your figures out and on your PDF, it works very nicely. Your filing takes like 10 minutes. It's getting the figures together that takes a while.
Well, it's good to know. It's definitely more convenient. So I'm curious about the time that you spend on the road. Like how much time do you spend traveling over the road before you actually get to return home?
Oh, my run's more or less fixed. We're restricted to having the animals on the trailer to 26 hours. And in that time, we're supposed to keep them comfortable with. And for instance, I don't know what's going on there, but we're at least getting the summer this year. It was in Celsius. It was 32, 33 degrees the other day. So you have to take measures to keep them comfortable while you're traveling. And but I'll load here on Thursday morning, and I will unload down in Minnesota on Friday evening.
Okay.
So, and then we have biosecurity measures. We have to go back into Canada. I have to have the trailer completely washed out and disinfected. So I spend a good part of Saturday doing that. Longer than I should, I think, but I do it myself at a self-serve facility in Minnesota, and then drive back to a farm over in western Saskatchewan that I load at on Monday morning, and I unload Monday afternoon in Red Deer. And today is office day and maintenance day. Try to have tomorrow to myself, and then I start it all again on Thursday. That's my job. And my turnaround is 4,200 kilometers or so, which is, multiply that by 0.6, that's 2,400 miles plus, I guess. So do that every week, and it's good, except for, sorry.
That's a nice routine. I like a routine.
Well, it certainly is a routine. and as long as nothing happens to upset it, it's pretty decent. This winter was tough. Mm-hmm. It was a dirty winter. It seemed like every trip was, well, I think we had 3 trips where we had them at below minus 36 at times. And the wind never quit blowing. And when I'm coming home, I'm empty, and it's not very nice to feel like you're just a sail on ice.
Yeah. So. Well, what is your like favorite area to travel in? You've been in and out of Canada. It sounds like you're in the upper Midwest most of the time, but do you have a favorite part? I guess over considering all the years you've traveled, is there a favorite part of the country or just region that you'd like to travel?
Well, I've done a lot in BC at times. It can be challenging. It's also you can't beat the scenery. I'm glad I'm not going there today. It's very, very hot. They had heat warnings out on the coast, and that. So I'm glad I'm not going there. But I like going just across Canada. I've never been further east than Quebec City, but I really like going into Quebec and the winter that I hauled the beef, I hauled into not really northern Quebec, but it's well north of Montreal, a place called Rouen, Val d'Or. Just pretty, and people were good, and the roads weren't the best, but I just enjoyed it.
Yeah. I'm all about the pretty scenery, so I'll have to add that to my list of places.
When you get into Northern Ontario, or what we call Northern Ontario, and run from the Trans-Canada, there's two parts. There's a south section they call Highway 11, and then you can take the North Road, which is Highway 17. Or maybe I might have them mixed up as far as north and south goes. One goes around Lake Superior, and you get that. You don't get much prettier scenery than there, but boy, there is a lot of rocks and trees. They become pretty common after a while.
Yeah,
rocks and trees and little lakes, but it's still great.
Yeah.
Well, when you get a chance to come up over a hill and you look out over Lake Superior, it's an incredible scene.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to ask you a little bit about some of the kind of health-related challenges over the road. I know we talked a little bit before we started recording the podcast, and on all these episodes, I really like to ask this question because I know that there are some challenges that drivers face over the road that are, unique to being over the road, or just are a little more complicated than maybe people who are over the road like this. And so let's just kind of see what would you say is your biggest health related challenge that you're dealing with as a truck driver over the road?
Well, I think everybody suffers from the sedentary. It's, when I before I started doing the long distance work, I did a lot of market loads of pigs into a plant here in central Alberta, and you do 2 a day, and so you have to clean and wash the trailer each time before you go for your next load. So it definitely wasn't sedentary. And when I've been doing this moving these little pigs to the States for the last 4 years, and you sure feel the difference. Your birthdays are against you, and so your legs tighten up more. You have to make sure your legs can move before you jump out anymore, because you're just older, and your body doesn't stretch the same way it used to. And the food is not great. Like the hours of service that they brought out and the way they enforce the hours of service kind of force you to keep going when you should really be able to stop and have at least a light lunch. it used to be not uncommon to be able to stop and at least have a bowl of soup and a sandwich or something like that. You know, you get a hot sandwich. But you really can't do that anymore. And as a result, it's taken away more options from us, even now. And people are looking for return on investment. So if you stop someplace, chances are, at least here in Canada, you've got a Petro-Canada card lock and a Burger King restaurant or an A&W restaurant, and we all know those are kind of fun to take kids to, but they're not a lot of fun to eat every day.
Yeah.
And then it begins to tell on you if you're not careful. Yeah. It tells on your belt. Like in this job, especially, there's no chance to stop for we're exempt from the ELDs in this hauling livestock, and I'm not sure where it's going to here in Canada, but in the States we are, and you want to get there and get them done, and you don't get a chance, or at least in this particular job, you don't get a chance to go to the major truck stops where they might have a gym or something like that. You don't get the opportunity to have a structured exercise regimen. Let's put it that way. I come from a background in sports, so I was used to being able to do road work and that, and it structured it into my life, and then it gradually faded away after I started working, and now when I think about it, it's been a long gradual life. It's probably 20 years since I did anything which would amount to structured exercise. And you know, we do have the opportunity. Most of us have some kind of fridge and an inverter, and you can microwave and whatnot. That takes a really intensified home time to be able to stock your fridge with food that is worthwhile. And it would be a worthwhile thing to do, but you just don't do it seems.
Yeah.
Or you do it one trip out of 6.
I could understand. Like sometimes knowing like we could do it and actually doing it are not the same.
No. No, definitely not. So it's a sedentariness of the life that, you know, there was a point in time when I used to pick the bulls up that had been bought at different auction markets all the way along Highway 2 here in Alberta, which is the north-south corridor, and I'd take them to a feedlot. But bulls are, you know, they're all type A personalities, and they not always do they want the next guy next to them. And I swear I spent those years doing that, just living on adrenaline. You know, I wonder sometimes when I'm short of breath if that was the fault.
Well, I have another question that I like to ask, and I forgot to ask you this a few minutes ago. I know you've talked about a lot of the things you like about driving, about trucking, but I really like to know, like, what do you like most about trucking? And then also tell me, what do you like least about trucking?
You know, that's a question I've it changes, or the answer changes from time to time. Sometimes when you're out there and everything is just working right, and there's not a lot of traffic to bother with you and whatnot, and you get a chance to look beyond the windshield. You get a chance to see, and after I have done this for as long as I have, and you realize the changes that have gone on across the country around you, that you, as you lived them, you weren't aware of them in a lot of ways, and it's kind of fun to think about them. Like I don't know, you coming from the farm, you used to see, you had aspirations of doing certain things on your own farm, and you'd drive by other places where you knew that they'd achieved what you kind of wanted when you were growing up. Everybody wanted a machine shed of some sort. They wanted a better barn for their cows and whatnot. And then you could see it happening as you drove across the country. You could see, and now you drive by the same part of the country, and you realize that these places that had achieved this, they're in decline. Or some of them are abandoned altogether. You can tell the farmstead's been run down, and it's just when you look at it, that where a guy used to, here in the prairies at least, have maybe a half or 3/4. He was a pretty big farmer if he had 3/4 and now guys farm quarters by 15, 16 quarters at a time, and you just realize how things have changed. That they just haven't stayed the same, and some of them. This microchip shortage we're facing now, you realize, I believe it was probably in the late 80s when the microchip really started to have an impact on us and how things, and it's changed so much of what we used to do, made it faster and whatnot. And obviously we're very dependent on it because, for instance, I tried to buy a sensor for my truck the other day, and they can't do it. And in some cases, we're totally disabled because we don't have the microchip available to us. But it's just those things gives you a chance to think about. Sorry, I went tangential on you there, but that's one of the things that gives you a chance to do. You think about things like that, or at least I do. Mm-hmm. And then I'll shut my phone right off and just let myself drive so that nobody bothers me. The worst thing is I understand that we need laws and need them to be enforced, but I hate the way that the laws that apply to trucking are applied, and in some ways the attitude of the people who are enforcing them. We aren't criminals, but the attitude, some of them, some of the enforcement officers have this gotcha mentality that their intent is to trap you into being able to write a ticket to you in some fashion at any point in time. And I know there's some really good ones too, but it's the ones that are intent on trying to catch you, and it's the DOT. They don't need unmarked cars. They should be high presence, high visibility presence, not an unmarked car hidden behind a bush or something. In my opinion, it's That's not what the DOT should be about. So when they're running unmarked vehicles, then obviously it's going further up the chain that they feel like they have to prove, have to be able to sneak to catch you. And I don't mind the roadside inspections points and that, like they're there. So more or less to remind you to keep your nose clean. But that's the part that I don't like, and the paperwork. Like I was talking before, the rules that we have to follow just to be able to trade internationally are sometimes frustrating, but they're there.
Yeah. Well, Ross, I have one final question. I really enjoyed our conversation. I've got a lot of notes because you said some good stuff here. But I have one more question and then we'll wrap up. For anyone who's listening who maybe, I don't know, maybe they are new to trucking or just interested in what you do, maybe some things that challenges you faced are kind of resonating. Do you have any kind of bit of advice for just other drivers who may be facing some similar challenges, or maybe someone who's thinking about trucking or considering this as a field?
Well, if you're going to own your own, the spreadsheet is your friend.
My apologies, but this is where we had that technical glitch I mentioned at the very beginning. So I want to share with you the rest of the great advice that he was sharing in response to the question that I just asked. So again, a spreadsheet is your friend. He said, if you're going to be an owner, operator, in business, you need to make sure that you're keeping a spreadsheet and getting really good with a spreadsheet. I personally like spreadsheets, so I can relate to that. Number 2, he said, was don't underpay yourself. He mentioned other companies pay drivers, whatever the going rate is, and you have to make sure that you know your value and you do not underpay yourself. The third bit that he shared in response to this question was, if he had to do it all over again, he said he'd buy a used Peterbilt. At the beginning, he talked a lot about the different Fords that he used. He talked a lot about trucks. So that was, if you missed that, go back. I liked hearing him talk about that. But he said if he had to do it all over again, he'd buy a used Peterbilt. He said they're good trucks and you can get a good deal on a used one. And he said that would just be the way to go. And then finally, he said that it's important to partner with someone who understands the dynamic of, over the road trucking and the lifestyle and the type of work. And it's, it's very different, but having a partner, your husband, your spouse, your wife, whoever that is for you, that understands the dynamic of this type of work is going to be really important in just everything that you do, how you do your work, how you decompress in home life, just all the way around. Having someone who understands the trucking life is important. So those were the great responses he gave to that question that I asked, and I wanted to make sure that you got that. And I want to thank him. Thank you, Ross, for taking time and coming on the podcast and sharing so much of your story and just, really diving in, taking your time and listening to what I was asking and kind of digging back in your memory and sharing some of those good stories with us. I really appreciate you. And as always, if you know someone who is an over-the-road driver, or maybe you are, I invite you to be a guest. We are always in need of new guests for the podcast. So go to our website, HCITpodcast.com, and click on Be a Guest and submit that form, and I'd be happy to meet with you. All right, everyone. Until next time, have a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you for listening to the Healthy Conversations in Trucking podcast. Learn more or be a guest on a future episode by visiting healthyconversationsinTrucking.com or simply HCITpodcast.com.